nothing wrong with your television set. This is a pixie bell. The sound is much too high for human ears. Oh, there you are, Tink. Hey, get that stuff off of me. If you're familiar with the story of Peter Pan, you know that a little sprinkling of Tinkerbell's fairy dust can make you fly. Tink, wait a minute. Haven't you forgotten something? Aren't you going to take the audience along?
Fly away with us, second star to the right and straight on till morning, and discover the behind-the-scenes story of how the timeless tale of Peter Pan was transformed into a soaring Disney classic.
But Peter, how do we get to Neverland?
The story of Peter Pan began its life on the London stage in 1904. It was written by Scottish novelist and playwright James Matthew Barrie.
Sir James Barrie was inspired. I guess he was visited by the muse when he created Peter Pan. It was just a marvelous idea, and the testament is the fact that it's lived all these years and had so many incarnations. He created something that I guess will be immortal.
In 1913, a touring company of Peter Pan was seen by this youngster. The boy was Walt Disney. He never forgot this epic of boyhood and its unique combination of fantasy and swashbuckling adventure. In 1924, Walt also saw a silent film version of Peter Pan, starring Betty Bronson as Peter. The film contained many innovations, such as a live actress playing Tinkerbell, and special effects that were the state-of-the-art for their day. The silent film, however, adhered to many of the conventions of the stage version of Peter Pan, including the stars rather obviously flying on wires, a performer in a dog suit as Nana, and a costumed actor as the crocodile. Walt Disney's efforts to make Peter Pan as an animated feature actually began in the late 1930s, during the production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, in an era when Disney's filmmaking imagination was at its peak.
Animation was in many ways the ideal medium for Peter Pan because it's a fantasy.
Walt Disney himself noted, "The cartoon method gave us many advantages over the stagecraft of Barrie's day, which no amount of pixie dust could cure."
Here for the first time was a medium where the imagination is limitless. Animation could do anything. And you're so free to do things, to picture things, to show people things that you couldn't do on stage.
In 1939, Disney acquired the screen rights, and by early 1940, storyboards were begun. These never-before-seen watercolor illustrations by renowned British artist David Hall were part of Disney's initial work. Hall had also done extensive visual development of Alice in Wonderland for Disney in 1938. In this early version of the story, Nana traveled with Peter and the children to Neverland, as seen in these rare original story sketches. Much of the art created at this time was also darker than the original play, and far more sinister than a typical Disney effort.
Now, my dear princess, you'd better talk, my dear. This is your last chance, Tiger Lily.
Peter!
Here's your spirit free. Give it to him, Captain. Cleave him to the brisket.
Tiger Lily.
Another part of this early work was an elaborate musical number for Captain Hook's pirate crew, which was ultimately replaced by a different song, The Elegant Captain Hook. An attempt to persuade the Lost Boys to join the pirates' ranks, this earlier song, written by studio music director Frank Churchill along with Ray Kelly, is reconstructed here using a rare song demo recording, coupled with never-before-seen storyboard drawings of the original sequence.
Aye, pirates, the only life for red-blooded men. If you're thinking of the future and you'd like a life of ease, if you'd like to make a fortune for your crew, if you've ever had a hanger and to sail the seven seas, then a pirate's life is just the life for you. Yo ho ho, up and herring you must go, so you might as well make up your minds to sign. If you'd like a share of plunder, if you care for blood and thunder, simply step right up and sign the dotted line.
By 1941, a basic story structure was completed. However, the onset of World War II stopped the development. After the war, Walt Disney brought Peter Pan back into development. Progress continued throughout the 1940s, including extensive concept art by renowned color stylist Mary Blair.
Finally, in 1950, he said, now's the time, let's do it. And they did. The Disney version of Peter Pan has another interesting first. It's the first time a boy was shown as Peter Pan. There had been a tradition from the time of Maude Adams on the stage and right through Mary Martin, and in recent years Kathy Rigby, Sandy Duncan, many others have done it, of women playing Peter Pan. But it was something that was broken, a tradition that was broken by Walt Disney by showing Peter Pan as a boy. Now, it's an animated boy, but it was really a boy's voice, and he was depicted as a boy, which is what he's supposed to be.
Walt assigned the character of Peter Pan to animator Milt Kahl.
I remember hearing Milt Kahl lecture about animation one time, and he said that one of the real challenges for him was animating weightlessness, animating a character who is sort of floating in midair, not flying, but just sort of floating. It's details like that that we in the audience are not supposed to think about. Of course, we shouldn't. We're involved in the story.
Young Bobby Driscoll was assigned to the role of Peter.
Where is that villain, Captain Hook? I'll slice him up and throw him to that crocodile.
I guess Bobby Driscoll was an obvious choice for Walt to make because he was the resident juvenile star at the studio.
Driscoll had debuted in Song of the South, after which Disney cast him in several projects, including So Dear to My Heart and as Jim Hawkins in Treasure Island.
Get on with it, girl.
My name is Wendy. Wendy Moore Angela Darling.
Wendy's enough.
Walt also didn't have to look far for the voice of Wendy. He found what he called the gentle and gracefully feminine voice in the same actress who had played Alice in Wonderland, Catherine Beaumont.
I heard about Peter Pan because the studio had started working on the writing part of it. I went directly from finishing Alice and immediately started working on the voice for Wendy.
Oh, slave in the mirror, come from the farthest space. Through wind and rain
I am here, young mistress.
Oh, my goodness, you got here in a hurry. I didn't get to finish the magic words.
Well, it so happened that I was in the neighborhood.
Hans Conried, seen here as the face in the magic mirror, was cast in the tradition of the stage play as both Captain Hook
What? That Peter Pan.
and Mr. Darling.
Out! Out, I say!
Hans Conried was inspired casting, you'd have to say, as Captain Hook. He was a consummate actor and had been one of the busiest and best radio actors throughout the 30s and 40s. So he was well schooled in how to act.
To bring the villainous Captain Hook to animated life, Walt assigned veteran animator Frank Thomas.
So I was wondering who was going to get the juicy assignment of doing Captain Hook, and I heard that Walt wanted me to do it. I thought, gee, putting me on that kind of a villain, a comic thing. The story man, Ed Penner, had seen him as a foppish guy, grand manners, you know, thought this was the way to live, midnight suppers, wine, all these gourmet connoisseur type things. While the director saw him as a tough, mean guy who'd shoot the cannon and shoot his own crew on the ship, and he was a menacing villain. He was a menacing opponent for Peter Pan.
Now let me see, where was I?
Walt knew that for his version of Peter Pan, Tinkerbell would have to be developed as a fully realized character. From the late 1930s on, character sketches trace Tinkerbell's development, and each reveals the then current conception of feminine beauty.
The character that I worked on was Tinkerbell, and Tinkerbell was visualized as a spot of light, which no doubt was something like a strong flashlight that moved around on the background of the stage. In our medium, you couldn't just use a spot of light. So I came up with the design that you see here. She's a pure pantomime character, which in itself I think is very interesting. That she didn't talk, but you know what she's thinking.
There's been a rumor for years that she was patterned after Marilyn Monroe. It's the kind of likable story people will repeat because it sounds good, but it doesn't really wash because she was not a star yet. She was not a superstar or a pop culture icon. She was in Hollywood, but the designers and animators at Disney wouldn't have known who she was.
I was Tinkerbell. I got this call to come over to Disney to do this audition, and they said, we want her to step on a mirror, a hand mirror that's on a dresser, look down, preen herself, and then suddenly see her hips and be very uncomfortable with the size of them. So I did. I said, certainly. And I stepped on and I looked down and I saw my hips and I measured them. I stamped my foot and marched away. And they said, would it be convenient for you to come next Tuesday? So they knew that I had the imagination that they needed.
The use of Margaret Carey as a live model for Tinkerbell was only part of the considerable reference used by Disney animators to bring Peter Pan to the screen.
The second part of my performance after the recording was done was what was really making the film, although in this situation it wasn't a film the audience saw. It was only for the animators, and it basically was done so that the animator could watch the action taking place.
The audience always got confused when we talked about live action help. We'd say, well, an artist needs a model. You got to have something to guide you. But it was also very helpful in little ways of a guy turning and looking back over his shoulder. How far do you turn his head? And you find if you got the real person to do it, this other arm here would come out as it turned, or have something come up to his chin, or some little thing you hadn't thought of. And very often that would make the scene.
If America has an art form, I'd say it's the Disney feature cartoon.
After nearly 2 decades of work, dozens of story treatments, and thousands of drawings, Walt Disney's Peter Pan was finally finished. It was first released on February 3rd, 1953, and was an immediate audience favorite. It has remained one of Disney's greatest animated achievements and a beloved classic.
When we watch Peter Pan, guess what? It's all safe. We all come back all right.
It's a story that has meaning for everybody, adults, you know, looking back and seeing this little boy who doesn't want to grow up.
The idea of keeping that youthful spirit, not surrendering your childhood, well, that's a very strong idea and a very magical one that has enormous appeal. And then, of course, it was sprinkled with that Disney magic. Talk about, a perfect marriage. Peter Pan and Disney.
You know, I have the strangest feeling that I've seen that ship before. A long time ago, when I was very young.
process of doing research for this DVD release of Peter Pan, the studio archives uncovered a magazine article written by Walt Disney himself, entitled Why I Made Peter Pan. It was originally published in April 1953, just a few weeks after the film's premiere, in a magazine called Brief, which is no longer in publication.
What you are about to see and hear is a dramatic recreation of an abridgment of that article in which Walt Disney explains the special significance of this story for him.
This is truly a rare opportunity for us to hear this story in Walt's own words.
Now, the world of make-believe has always delighted and absorbed me, ever since I was a little boy. It began when I was a child. Every evening after supper, my grandmother would take down from the shelf the well-worn volumes of Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen. We would gather around her and listen to the stories that we knew so well we could repeat them word for word. Of all the characters in the fairy tales, I loved Snow White best. And when I planned my first full-length cartoon, she inevitably was the heroine. Next to Snow White, I cared most for Peter Pan, but my introduction to him was even more exciting. We were living on a farm, and one morning as we walked to school, we found entrancing new posters. A road company was coming to the nearby town of Marceline, and the play they were presenting was Peter Pan, with Maude Adams. It took most of the contents of 2 toy savings banks to buy our tickets, but my brother Roy and I didn't care. For 2 hours, we lived in Neverland with Peter and his friends. I took many memories away from the theater with me, but the most thrilling of all was the vision of Peter flying through the air.
We meet again, Peter Pan! Captain Hook, prepare to die!
Shortly afterward, Peter Pan was chosen for our school play, and I was allowed to play Peter. No actor ever identified himself with the part he was playing more than I. And I was more realistic than Maude Adams in at least one particular. I actually flew through the air, and Roy was using a block and tackle to hoist me. Well, it gave way, and I flew right into the faces of the surprised audience. When I began producing cartoons, Peter Pan was high on my list of subjects. Actually, it was a long time before we began work on the story. In the first place, I was unwilling to start until I could do full justice to the well-loved story. Animation techniques were constantly improving, but they still fell short of what I felt was needed to tell the story of Peter Pan as I saw it. Not until 1947 did we begin production. When we finally sat down to go to work, we faced a real challenge. Peter Pan, you see, is a work of sheer magic, and you do not create magic to order. We had somehow to recreate the essence of make-believe and do it in such a way that millions of people who have known and loved Barrie's play since it was first performed in 1904 would recognize it and approve of what we had done. We found the key to our approach in the words of Barrie himself. Nothing of importance ever happens to us after we reach the age of 12. And he also once wrote the heartfelt plea, "Oh, that we might be boys and girls all our lives." Packed into these 2 sentences is the secret that the author had found. The understanding that no experience of our grown-up lives can equal the experience of the child, to whom everything in the world is bright and new and full of wonder. What Barrie wished to do, and what we had to do in bringing his play to the screen, was to recreate a children's world, but a children's world in which adults could find a place. As a reminder of the difficulty of building this kind of illusory world, our research told us how Barrie himself was in an agony of nervousness on the historic opening night of his play in London. He was afraid of the gallery gods, the tough-minded spectators in the cheap seats. But he worried needlessly. when the audience was asked from the stage the now famous question, "Do you believe in fairies?" they rose to a man to shout yes. Peter Pan's first success, then, was with grown-ups, the sophisticated first-night audience and the adult theatergoers who came on the nights that followed. Not for several days did any children see the play, but when they did, they claimed it for their own. And ever since, Peter Pan has been something unique in the theater, a fairy tale for children and adults. The difficulties of recreating the world that Barrie made were great, but they were also exciting and stimulating. Barrie's own play notations and stage directions, scribbled during rehearsals, were extremely helpful to us. His concepts of the characters and their reactions to magical events and strange circumstances gave us more insight into what he had in mind than the actual dialogue and scene description. We made no attempt and had no intent to hold the scope of the story to the theater stage dimension. We could define Neverland, which Barrie first called Never, Never, Neverland, very much as we pleased. The camp of the Indians, the pool of the mermaids, the trails of the lost boys, the lagoon of the pirate's ship, the cave and Skull Island, and all the mysterious landmarks of Barrie's fanciful geography, all could be established with our own imaginations. There is no miracle the mind can conceive that the cartoon animation technique cannot create. We needed no stage wires to lift Peter and Wendy and their eager co-adventurers into flight across the rooftops. We could detach Peter from his elusive shadow with the stroke of an animator's pencil. We could make the little sprite Tinkerbell glow like a firefly as she darts through space, and have her speak with the sound of bells. Our mechanics of fantasy are certainly different from the ones Barrie had at his command 50 years ago, but I think that in some ways we have come closer to his original concept than anyone else has. But he's the same Peter, and it's the same Neverland, and the same Tinkerbell, and the same darling family that we have always loved.
Her personality is big, but her size is small. And with a sprinkling of her magic pixie dust, she can make you fly. Her name is Tinkerbell, and she's the most dynamic and well-loved fairy of them all. Once upon a time, a beautiful pixie named Tinkerbell was born. She came from the imagination of British author James M. Barrie, who brought her to life in his 1904 stage play, Peter Pan. The first time anyone saw Tinkerbell was in the world premiere of Barrie's play. On stage, she was just a darting ball of light. She communicated with the sound of tinkling little bells. Since Peter was the only one who could understand her, he translated for the children in the audience. Tinkerbell made the transition from stage to screen in 1924, in the silent film version of Peter Pan. This was the first time that Tinkerbell was seen as a live girl. In her film debut, she appears as a bright and ethereal creature, a free-spirited fairy with a mind of her own. Her performance was enthralling and magical.
The Tinkerbell of the silent feature is this ornate pixie. She's got this long flowing dress. She's got headgear. Her hair is out. I mean, she's clearly a magical elf character.
Tinkerbell's next big break in the movies came in the early 1950s when Walt Disney began work on his animated film, Peter Pan. Mark Davis, one of Disney's most talented animators, was assigned the job of giving life and form to this unpredictable pixie.
Tinkerbell was one that I was asked to visualize, and they knew that this had to be a visual type of character couldn't be a spot of light, not in our medium. She can't speak. She's a pure pantomime character, which in itself I think is very interesting. That she didn't talk, but you know what she's thinking.
Faced with this challenge, the Disney animators felt that they needed a human model to help them bring Tinkerbell to life. There were rumors that she was modeled after starlet Marilyn Monroe. But Marilyn Monroe was unknown at the time the Disney studio was developing Peter Pan. The true inspiration for the animators was actress Margaret Carey.
It's magic for me to be able to say, yes, I was the reference model for Tinkerbell. I would walk in, and Mark and Jerry Geronimi would be sitting next to the camera, and they would show me storyboarding that they did, what they had in mind, and they would talk very quietly to me of what they wanted, and they would mark the area that they wanted me to work in. Now, behind me was this big blue cyc, and nothing else usually on the stage. Once in a while there was a prop. That's where your pantomiming comes in, because you have to figure out in your head where everything is and then hit those marks again. So they would tell me what they wanted her to do, and then I would become Tinkerbell in front of the camera.
Released in 1953, Walt Disney's Peter Pan was a great success. Tinkerbell's larger-than-life personality and fierce independence made her a favorite of boys and girls of all ages. Tinkerbell was now a star.
So I think there's this great sense of humor about Tinkerbell. There's this great kind of wry understanding. She looks like an innocent little character. She's not innocent at all. And, you know, certainly if you were a little boy growing up in that era, you liked Tinkerbell a lot because she's mighty pretty.
One thing everyone needs to know about pixies is that they are ruled by their emotions. Even Tinkerbell can have a hot temper.
And so Tinkerbell expresses her emotions. There's no hiding it. There's no subtlety. There's no idea of being quiet and demure. Whatever she thinks is out there. Tinkerbell lives truly in the moment.
You saved my life.
Because fairies are so small and always on the move, they unfortunately only have room for one emotional feeling at a time. The one emotion Tinkerbell couldn't control was her love for Peter Pan.
Well, Peter just took her for granted. And she was there. She was annoying. She was fun when he needed her. But Peter was all for Peter.
Tinkerbell is from Never Never Land, a place where there aren't any rules. She is liberated, a pixie way ahead of her time.
She's today's woman. She's absolutely today's woman. Women can do anything. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do whatever it is. No one has told her that, oh, no, that's not what ladies do.
Tinkerbell represents both a feminist woman, a smart woman.
Tinkerbell has it all. A modern fairy who makes her own decisions, living life to the fullest. Tinkerbell's magical qualities and worldwide appeal made her the logical choice to serve as goodwill ambassador for Walt Disney Studios. Because she's a pixie, she can be everywhere all the time.
Tinkerbell was a great way to open up the TV show. It was a great way to bridge segments of the TV show, and it was also great to link the live-action parts of the park when she would fly across the castle and introduce the fireworks.
She was really the gatekeeper. She was the one that would open the door and say, here's this wonderful world of Disney.
Even now, Tinkerbell's influence continues. The character of Ariel in The Little Mermaid was inspired by the free-thinking Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell pioneered the independent spirit and take-charge attitude of a whole new generation of Disney's leading ladies. And because of Tinkerbell's popularity, it's no surprise that she'll soon be starring in her own animated feature.
Tinkerbell to me is magical, she's fantasy, and she's really beautiful.
Tinkerbell has always to be represented the magic of Disney.
Tinkerbell not only personified Disney magic, but the new power of women.
She's still just as adorable as she ever was. She is this feeling of freedom and adventure that people want.
Tinkerbell is a timeless character, the very essence of all that is possible when a fairy is true to herself. And in the end, Tinkerbell continues to live happily ever after and will always provide the invitation to an ever-awaiting world of magic for children of all ages. Tinkerbell brings with her the magic of Neverland. When we're with Tink, we never have to grow up.
Since the misty beginnings of time, when man first scratched these crude drawings on the walls of his cave, he has felt an instinctive urge to share his impressions with others. He was eager to tell not only his experiences, but also of the many vivid things, some joyful and some tragic, that came crowding into his imagination. With the desire to communicate these to other people, man created the art of storytelling. As time went by, he found that stories can be told in many ways, with crude sketches, with events carved in stone, or sometimes with a painting that said more than words ever could. Tales could be told with books and plays, and even with music. Yes, there were elaborate ways of telling a story. And no less magical, there were simple ways.
Now you just set yourself down here and listen, with both ears wide open, because this Brer Rabbit, he is the outdoorest, the most bodacious critter in the whole world. Now, this here tale didn't happen just yesterday, nor the day before. 'Twas a long time ago.
Then, shortly after the beginning of the 20th century, the motion picture film was discovered, a new and exciting way of telling a story. Now, the audience of the storyteller could be lifted and taken beyond book covers and the confining space of the operatic and theater stage. Now the eye could join the soaring flight of the imagination wherever it may lead. However wondrous and fine-spun the storyteller's dream could now be seen as well as imagined. Yes, now there were all of these many ways of telling stories. But more important than this, what of the storytellers themselves? Down through the ages, there were the immortal Aesop, La Fontaine, the great French fabulist, the brothers Grimm, William Shakespeare, men divinely endowed with wisdom and wit. There were the great spinners of adventure yarns, James Fenimore Cooper and Robert Louis Stevenson. And then there was a very special kind of storyteller, a Scotsman by the name of James M. Barrie. He was the man who said, "Nothing very important ever happens to us after we are 12 years old." You see, James Barrie was the creator of The Little Boy Who Never Grew Up, Peter Pan. Barrie particularly loved the outdoor adventure tales of his fellow storytellers, Cooper and Stevenson. Their fascination and influence on him can plainly be seen in the adventurous characters which appear throughout his story of Peter Pan. And although James Barrie wrote Peter Pan as a play, he chafed at the indoor physical limitations of the stage. Until the last years of his life, he experimented constantly, seeking new ways to give his imagination free rein. Then one day, along came another storyteller, his name, Walt Disney.
They never met, but it was in James Barrie and his creations that Walt Disney found a kindred spirit. In his decision to make a film of Peter Pan, Disney hoped to show completely, to fulfill those dreams of Barrie's which could only be suggested on the stage. And so the Disney production of Peter Pan quietly began. Slowly at first, the delicate task of transplanting the creatures of Barrie's imagination to the animated screen was undertaken. For instance, here's Peter Pan's arch enemy, the pirate Captain Hook. He mustn't be too short and fat, or too tall and thin either. There, that's about right. At least this rough sketch will serve as a starting point. Here's Nana, another character. No longer an actor hidden in a dog suit as he was on the stage, but the wonderful, fluffy creature of Barrie's imagination. Now a wondrous Indian chief, as a child might imagine him from a favorite story. Oh. Here's the famous pixie, Tinker Bell. On the stage, she could be seen only as a moving light. Now, at last, she had a chance to show her personality. They were all there. The mermaids, Mr. Smee, the Lost Boys, Wendy, Michael, and John. Thousands of drawings made, thrown away, remade, tested over and over again. Then hundreds of thousands of finished drawings to move the characters through the story. As the rough sketches for the characters were approved and sent on for development, Disney storymen began to work out the various scenes of Peter Pan. This is done with the aid of large boards, onto which are laid out the story sketches in continuity, much like the panels in a newspaper comic strip. They are rough sketches played against songs and dialogue which have already been recorded. Here now is the creative storyline of the scene in which Captain Hook and his men vainly try to persuade Wendy and the lost children to join their villainous pirate crew. Yo-ho! Faster now. It was the animators' turn to take the story sketches and begin to breathe life and movement into them. While the character animators and the storymen busied themselves with their individual tasks, nearby, still another type of artist devoted his efforts to a specialized assignment, the story backgrounds. There's a Pan's eye view looking down on the land of Never Never. Here, the city of London back in 1904. The Mermaid Lagoon, Skull Rock. Here's another department full of strange sounds and violence, but no less creative in its own way than the artist with brush and pencil. This is the Disney Sound Effects Department. For the production of Peter Pan, over 400 separate sound effects were required, right down to the ominous tick-tock of the alarm clock in the stomach of Captain Hook's famous crocodile. Yes, in 100 rooms and departments, Disney artists and artisans, craftsmen and technicians were busy telling the story of Peter Pan in their own way. Amid the ordered confusion of sketches and drawings, sounds and music, with both individual skill and patient teamwork, they worked toward a special moment. That moment when all the bits and pieces would be joined in a pattern, and from it all would suddenly emerge Peter Pan. Pan himself, appearing out of nowhere, to laugh, to stop the hands of the clock, and for a magical little while again lead the world to a land of dreams and adventure. When there's a smile in your heart, there's no better
Give me a career as a buck.
What? That Peter Pan. If I could only find his hideout, I'd trap him in his lair. But where is it? Mermaid Lagoon? Now we've searched that. We've combed Cannibal Cove. Here!
Yes, in the art of the storytellers, there is magic. Strange, unexplainable. Yet so real, it becomes part of all our lives. As Walt Disney joins hands with James Barrie, there is magic born again. Under their spell, the screen comes alive with glowing color and high adventure. Once you know Peter Pan, he will live in your heart forever. Here for all to see is true magic, the timeless art of the storyteller.
I'm Ron Clements.
And I'm John Musker.
In our years with Walt Disney Feature Animation, we've been animators, producers, and directors. Having been through it all, we can tell you that probably the most difficult and time-consuming part of the process of making an animated film is getting the story right. The process of developing the story can take many years.
We try many, many different ideas in written treatments, visual concept art, and storyboards. Some stick, but a large number of those ideas get discarded along the way.
It was no different when Walt Disney was still around and running the studio. Many of his now classic animated films went through long periods of development before actual animation production. Peter Pan was no exception.
Walt had originally intended for Peter Pan to be his second animated film after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which opened in 1937. Peter Pan did not actually make it to the screen until 1953, nearly 16 years later, in fact, the year that we were born.
We're here in the studio's animation research library where all the artwork for Disney's animated features is stored. Some of this material dates back to the late 1930s and early 1940s.
Today we are going to go back in time to take a look at some of those ideas. Ideas that were considered but ultimately rejected. So please join us now as we take a look at the Peter Pan that almost was.
Peter Pan began in 1904 as a stage play by J.M. Barrie, which is the story most of us are familiar with.
A lot of Walt Disney's effort in the early years was spent in trying to find the right balance between faithfully adapting Barrie's classic and exploring different ways to tell the story for the medium of animated film. For instance, in one of the greatest departures from Barrie's Peter Pan, instead of opening the story in the Darling's nursery, Disney explored the possibility of starting the story in Neverland. This version establishes Tinkerbell's jealousy as she asks the mermaids if they've seen Peter Pan.
Well, hello, if it isn't little Miss Tinkerbell. What's bothering your pretty bells, my dear? Still ringing your bells for Peter Pan, eh?
Careful, Tink dear, you'll crack a chime.
Funny thing, Peter Pan scarcely ever pays any attention to her.
Why should he? My, aren't we the jealous little pixie-wixie?
In this opening sequence, the Lost Boys play follow the leader and are captured by the Indians. Peter makes peace with the Indians.
Make Peter Pan a big chief.
The Lost Boys are mad at Peter because if there's peace with the Indians, there's nothing for them to do. So they want to go to the real world like Peter does and hear mothers telling stories. Peter promises to kidnap a mother for them.
Walt eventually toned down the idea of kidnapping Wendy by returning to J.M. Barrie's stage play in which Wendy is eager to see Neverland.
Another radically different approach to the beginning of the story came from the earliest treatment in May 1939, which was based on Barrie's first Peter Pan book, Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. This version started with the birth of Peter Pan on Bird Island and told the story of how he flew from his nursery in London to return to his birthplace and how he came to live in Neverland and become the leader of the Lost Boys.
At a story meeting a few weeks later, Walt changed his mind, saying, "We ought to get right into the story itself, which is when Peter comes to the house to get his shadow. That's where the story picks up. How Peter came to be is really another story."
With this approach, the movie was to open in the Darlings' nursery.
Insolent boy, I'll slash you to ribbons!
And I'll cut you to pieces. Aha!
Over the next few years, Walt and his story team explored several different versions of the nursery scene.
Oh, don't lock it, Mother.
In the film, Wendy tells her mother she's keeping Peter Pan's shadow in the drawer.
Peter Pan. Shadow?
In one early version of the story, it was Mrs. Darling who sees Peter Pan outside the window of the children's nursery and captures his shadow. In the writer's own words,
"The Darlings' nursemaid is a Newfoundland dog named Nana. She is every bit as efficient, however, as a human nursemaid and diligently goes about her duties, turning down the beds and laying out the children's night clothes. Tonight, Mr. and Mrs. Darling are dining out, and Mrs. Darling enters the nursery dressed for the occasion. She is quite startled to see the face of a mysterious boy peering in at the window. Mr. Darling enters in a tantrum, struggling with his dress tie. Mrs. Darling's skillful fingers subdue the tie. Mr. Darling calms down, only to blow up again when he collides with Nana and gets his dress suit covered with dog hair.
Oh, Nana, for goodness sake!
When the children are out of earshot, Mrs. Darling tells her husband about the mysterious face at the window, recalling a visit from the strange boy a week ago. Mr. Darling is quite sure the whole affair is just so much foolish imagination. Until Mrs. Darling produces the shadow that the strange boy left behind after his first visit. It proves to be a very lively shadow, and Mrs. Darling barely has time to hide it again as the children return to the nursery, ready for bed.
What's cool about Peter Pan, of course, is the fantasy. And here, you know, they're standing on a cloud, sort of with a rainbow passing
That
through it.
has Nana on the cloud.
Nana, yeah, in this early version, or some version, they actually put Nana in Neverland with them, and that would have been interesting to see.
Another version suggested telling the entire story through the voiceover narration of Nana, the children's faithful nursemaid, as she accompanied the children to Neverland.
This idea was never fully realized, but these discussions probably helped develop the delightful character we know from the final film.
I'm so happy. I think I'll give you a kiss.
In the film, Wendy tries to give Peter Pan a kiss, but the jealous Tinkerbell destroys the moment by pulling Wendy's hair. In some earlier versions, Peter doesn't understand what a kiss is.
Shall I give you a kiss, she says. Well, thank you, says Peter, holding out his hand expectantly. Don't you know what a kiss is, Wendy asks aghast. Well, not to hurt his feelings, she gives him a thimble. Now, says Peter, shall I give you a kiss? Oh, if you please, says Wendy primly, inclining her face toward him. Peter drops an acorn button into her hand, so Wendy says she will wear his kiss on a chain around her neck.
These are great. I mean, there's some wonderful drawings here, some of which I've never seen before. This is a really fun one of John playing with, I guess, a starfish character.
Yeah, in the early versions of the story, the one that wasn't released, John was actually left behind.
Up to Neverland!
In the film, Wendy, Michael, and John all fly away to Neverland with Peter Pan, leaving Nana at home. In some of the earlier versions, John was left behind for being too practical and serious. In the writer's own words,
I'll go, says Wendy, if my brothers can go too. Oh, Peter inspects John's dream. It is dull and drab. John dreaming of himself as the image of his father. He's at a desk adding figures. Oh, not him, says Peter disgustedly. Peter turns to Michael and looks at his dream. Michael is fighting an Indian with his right hand and grabbing a tiger by the tail with his left. He'll do, says Peter.
And John was left out of the adventure until 1948, when writer Ralph Wright sent a memo to Walt suggesting to make John a strong character, a comic little replica of his dad. And John goes along only to protect Wendy on this dangerous experiment, though he tries to disprove everything. At the bottom of the memo, Walt wrote, "Good."
When there's a smile in your heart, there's no better time to start.
In the film, our first introduction to Neverland comes as Peter and Wendy and the boys arrive.
In an earlier version, our first glimpse of Neverland comes just before their arrival, in a sequence entitled The Vicious Circle. That established the Lost Boys, the Indians, and the pirates in a comical circular chase around the island.
For a time, Walt and his story team played with the idea that Wendy brought along her Peter Pan picture book to Neverland. In the writer's own words,
Wendy clutches the book as Peter recklessly exposes himself and the children to capture by taunting the pirates, who charge without hesitation. Pan quickly pushes the kids behind a huge leaf, leaving only their feet exposed. Smee fires a supercharged blunderbuss at point-blank range. The leaf is blasted to bits, leaving only a row of empty shoes. The children, unseen by the pirates, are safely perched on a limb overhead.
The book falls from the tree and into the hands of the pirates.
Back at the pirate ship, the pirates discover Hook's picture in the book. They are very much amused. Hook looks at the book and finds himself pictured. Smee takes a peek at the book and reads aloud, "The exact location of Peter Pan's secret hideout is..." He's interrupted by Hook, who yells, "Let me see that!" Smee obligingly tears the page out of the book and hands it to Hook. The page is caught by a gust of wind and is whisked through the porthole. A comic chase follows, ending with the page going over the side of the ship and landing in the water. The ever-present crocodile bites out the text, leaving only the margins.
For a time, Walt and his story team tried to fit in a sequence similar to a sequence that had been cut out of Snow White. Peter brings Wendy and her brothers to his hideout and treats his hungry guests to an imaginary dinner.
All ready for dinner, mates?
I want chocolate cake, strawberry,
Lemon pie, ice cream, and cake.
We'll eat hearty, mates.
Woohoo!
They are seated at a table and Peter carves in pantomime an imaginary turkey.
What is this anyway? A game?
Business of boys eating invisible celery with sound effects, drinking soup, filling water glasses, etc. All in pantomime with sound effects. Nana's bewilderment when she is given a plate of food to eat. She tries to be polite and licks the invisible food, but does not believe Peter when he tells her that there is food on the plate.
Too bad you need real food to enjoy dinner. Make-believe is much more fun.
The imaginary dinner is followed by a real dinner, served by the fairies. As Walt said in one of the earliest story meetings, I think the fairies ought to wait on them. The fairies pick luscious things out of the trees and bring them to them. Fairies are sort of servants. To ordinary kids, fairies are something they dream about, but down here, you clap your hands and fairies appear. It's just ideal.
But unfortunately, as in Snow White, this charming scene was cut from Peter Pan as well.
And
there was a treasure, right? There was something with a treasure.
There was a treasure. There's some great drawings here of this cave filled with treasure that they're sort of silhouetted by these giant candles. Just great staging on this movie.
You'd better talk, me dear, for soon the tide will be in. Remember, there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground.
One of the first story treatments in 1939 contained a sequence from J.M. Barrie's play, the sequence on Skull Rock, in which Peter Pan rescues Tiger Lily, who has been kidnapped by Captain Hook.
But unlike the final film, in that version of the story, Peter and the others discover the pirate's treasure hidden in Skull Rock.
That's Skull Rock, where the pirates bury their treasure.
A later version of the storyboards shows them exploring Skull Rock and encountering the pirates' booby traps that guard the treasure.
Michael!
That version ended with Tiger Lily giving Peter Pan an Indian kiss, which Peter refers to as a thimble in Indian language.
Tinkerbell, take.
In the film, Tinkerbell is banished by Peter Pan for endangering Wendy when she first arrives in Neverland.
Tinkerbell, I hereby banish you forever.
In earlier versions of the story, Tinkerbell suffered further humiliations that led to her ultimate betrayal of Peter Pan's hideout. One version begins with Smee telling Captain Hook that trouble is brewing between Peter Pan and Tinkerbell.
Did you say Pan has banished Tinkerbell?
That he is.
But why?
Well, on account of Wendy, Captain.
But this version goes beyond the film version, when Smee informs Captain Hook that Peter is throwing a party for Wendy that very night.
And at that party, Wendy goes to find Tinkerbell, who's sulking in her room.
Tinkerbell, won't you come to the party? We're having so much fun.
Trying to cheer Tinkerbell up, Wendy takes off her ring and puts it on Tinkerbell's head like a crown.
Why, you look just like a little queen. That's it. You can be queen of the party.
But when Tinkerbell comes to the party, Peter proclaims Wendy as queen.
All hail, Queen Wendy!
Yay! In the film, Captain Hook's men capture Tinkerbell and bring her back to the pirate ship, where Hook tricks Tinkerbell into revealing the secret location of Peter Pan's hideout.
Thank you, me dear. You've been most helpful.
But in a draft from 1941, Tinkerbell is so angry with Peter and Wendy that she goes of her own free will.
What's that, my dear? Well, well.
In the film, Wendy sings a song about mothers to the lost boys that makes them sad. Even the pirates sneaking up on the hideout get nostalgic.
A few years earlier, Walt and his story team tried a version of the story in which the lost boys decide to go home with Wendy. Peter Pan draws a line in the sand telling them that once they go to the real world and grow up, they can never return. And Wendy gives Peter a piece of her mind.
And furthermore, Peter Pan, you're the most conceited, dishonest, deceitful person I've ever met. You never think of anyone but yourself. You're selfish, that's what you are.
In one early version, after Wendy makes the lost boys miss their mothers, Peter Pan tells the story of his own mother, how he flew out the window as a baby, and when he returned, he found the window locked and a new baby in his bed.
My mother had forgotten all about me. So you see, Wendy, you're wrong about mothers. They don't wait.
I want to go home before our window is closed.
In very early versions of the story, as in Barrie's play, when the Indians make peace with Peter Pan for saving Tiger Lily, they vow to guard Peter's hideout from the pirates.
And the Indians are guarding the hideout when the pirates attack.
Curly, Twin, John, to your places! Quiet, everybody. If the Indians won, they'll beat the tom-toms. It's safe to go now. The boys will guide you through the woods.
In the film, Captain Hook leaves a package for Peter Pan, a bomb disguised as a present from Wendy.
And now to take care of Peter Pan.
But in the earliest versions of the story, Walt Disney and his story team took their cue from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, knowing that Wendy, in her duties as the lost boy's mother, gave each of the boys medicine before bedtime.
Captain Hook put poison in Peter's dose.
Tinkerbell tries to warn him, but he doesn't believe her. And so she drinks the poison medicine before Peter can.
Tink! It was poison.
Peter begs Tinkerbell not to die, telling her she's the most important thing to him, and as in the J.M. Barrie stage production, asks the audience if they believe in everything Tinkerbell represents, to applaud for her to help keep her alive.
But after much discussion, Walt decided that the appeal for audience applause, which worked so well in the theater, would be difficult to pull off in a movie house. And this is from the sword fight between Peter Pan and Captain Hook, and Wooly Reitherman, again, one of the 9 Old Men, animated Captain Hook in this sequence. Great action animator, and it's just full of life, this whole sword fight.
Really broad, funny slapstick. You know, there were actually a lot of gags that never made it into the fight scene. The climactic fight between Peter Pan and Captain Hook was always part of the story. The development of the fight through storyboards concerned the gradual creation of specific gags within the fight,
including one whole sequence that showed Tinkerbell and the Pixies joining in the battle, temporarily turning the tide in their favor.
Even the beloved ending of the film went through many, many versions until Walt Disney was happy with the resolution of the story.
In one version, Peter Pan gives the lost boys the chance to go home.
In another, Nana is the only one who sees the pirate ship sailing off.
But in the end, Peter Pan flies Wendy and her brothers home, and then returns to Neverland as the darlings watch from the window. Walt Disney was a perfectionist when it came to storytelling, and with his team of writers and artists, he worked tirelessly to craft each film, pushing the technology of animation and the art of storytelling beyond the limits of the films that came before.
The Peter Pan that almost was contained wonderful sequences, emotional moments, and the heart that made all his films timeless classics.
So you can be sure that the Peter Pan that is the story Walt